The crystal towers of Kythera Prime sang their death song in the morning light. HFY pressed his six-fingered hand against the window of his laboratory and felt the vibrations travel through the transparent crystal wall. The towers had been singing for 3 cycles now, their harmonic frequencies growing weaker each day as the radiation from their dying sun slowly poisoned the crystal matrices that powered their civilization. Outside, the 7 moons of Kythera hung in the violet sky like wounded pearls. 3 of them had already gone dark, their populations evacuated to the remaining 4 worlds before the solar storms made travel impossible. But evacuation to where? The Galactic Council had made their position clear in yesterday's transmission. Kythera's situation, while regrettable, does not warrant the massive resource expenditure required for full species relocation, Chancellor Vexmore had announced in his cold, mechanical voice. The insectoid leader of the Hegemonic Trade Alliance had spoken with the casual indifference of someone discussing crop rotations, not the extinction of an entire species. HFY's crystalline skin shifted from deep blue to angry red as he remembered the council session. 47 species had voted. 43 had voted against assistance. Only 4 had supported the Kythera plea for help, and those 4 were minor species with little political power and fewer resources. The irony was bitter. For 800 years, Kythera crystal technology had powered the galaxy's communication networks. Every hyperspace message, every interstellar trade negotiation, every diplomatic transmission between worlds relied on Kythera quantum crystals. Their people had freely shared this technology, asking nothing in return but the chance to live in peace among the crystal spires they had grown over millennia. Now, as their sun entered its final death spiral, the galaxy had turned its back on them. A soft chime drew HFY's attention to his communication console, another message from the emergency committee, no doubt. More discussions about which cultural artifacts to prioritize in their pathetically small evacuation ships. The Kythera had maybe 50 vessels capable of interstellar travel, enough to save perhaps 1% of their population. But when he activated the console, the message header made him freeze. The transmission wasn't from the committee. It wasn't even from anywhere in the Kythera system. The sender was listed as Human Exploration Vessel Endeavor, Captain Maria Santos commanding. Humans? HFY's skin shifted to puzzled yellow. The humans were barely 2 centuries into their membership in the Galactic Council. They were considered a minor species, relegated to the outer rim territories far from the galaxy's center of power and influence. What would a human ship be doing way out here, so close to the galactic edge? He opened the message, and a small holographic projection materialized above his console. A human female appeared, her dark hair pulled back in a practical style, wearing what looked like a military uniform. Her expression was serious but not unfriendly. "This is Captain Maria Santos of the Earth Space Force vessel Endeavor," the hologram said. "We received your emergency broadcast 3 days ago. We're currently 48 hours out from your system and requesting permission to approach." HFY's skin flickered through several colors as he processed this information. A human ship? Coming here? Why? Even if they wanted to help, what could one small exploration vessel do? The hologram continued. "I want you to know that your message has been forwarded to Earth Command and the Human Colonial Authority. We're not sure what kind of assistance we can provide yet, but we wanted to respond to your call. Nobody should have to face extinction alone." The message ended, leaving HFY staring at the empty space where the hologram had been. Nobody should have to face extinction alone. Such a simple statement, yet it contained more compassion than he had heard from the entire Galactic Council. He replayed the message twice more, studying the human captain's face. There was something in her eyes, a determination that reminded him of the old Kythera explorers who had first ventured beyond their home system centuries ago. But more than that, there was genuine concern. This human actually cared about the fate of strangers. HFY activated his own recording system and began composing a reply. "Captain Santos, this is HFY, Chief Science Coordinator of the Kythera Emergency Committee. Your message is the first offer of assistance we have received from any species in the galaxy." His skin shifted to a warm gold, the color of gratitude among his people. "We welcome your approach to our system and thank you for your concern for our welfare." He paused, uncertain how much to reveal. But something about the human's straightforward manner encouraged honesty. Our situation is dire. Our sun has entered an unstable phase, producing increasingly powerful solar storms that are destroying our crystal infrastructure. We have evacuation capacity for less than 2% of our population, and the Galactic Council has voted against providing assistance. The words came easier now. We do not know what help you might offer, but we are grateful that someone in this galaxy still believes that sentient life has value beyond economic calculations. Please approach at your convenience. We will provide you with safe passage coordinates around the solar storm patterns. As he sent the message, HFY felt something he had not experienced in months. Hope. It was a small hope, barely a flicker, against the overwhelming darkness of their situation. One human ship could not save 6 billion Cathara, but it represented something more important than rescue ships or evacuation plans. It represented the possibility that decency still existed somewhere in the galaxy. 3 hours later, his console chimed again. This time it was Elder Morthak, the ancient Cathara who led their ruling council. HFY, we have received a most unusual communication from the Galactic Council. The Elder's crystalline features showed confusion and surprise. It seems a minor species has formally requested an emergency session to discuss our situation. The humans have invoked Article 7 of the Galactic Charter. HFY's skin shifted to bright silver with shock. Article 7 hadn't been invoked in over a century. It allowed any council member to demand an immediate review of any decision that might result in species extinction. The humans are challenging the council's vote, he asked. More than that, Morthak replied, his ancient voice carrying a note of wonder. According to the transmission, they are claiming that the Cathara situation falls under the Galactic Preservation Mandate. They are arguing that our crystal technology qualifies us as a protected heritage species, and that allowing our extinction would violate interstellar law. This was impossible. The Galactic Preservation Mandate protected only a handful of species, whose knowledge or abilities were deemed irreplaceable. The criteria were so strict that only 12 species in the entire galaxy had ever qualified for protection. Elder, with respect, no species has been granted heritage status in over 400 years. The requirements— I know the requirements, young HFY, the Elder interrupted gently, but the humans seem to believe we qualify. More importantly, they are willing to stake their own political standing on defending us. As the implications sank in, HFY felt his hope grow stronger. The humans were not just offering assistance, they were risking their own position in galactic society to stand up for the Cathara, for strangers they had never met, living on worlds they had never seen. Outside his laboratory window, the crystal towers continued their dying song. But for the first time in months, HFY thought he heard a different note in their harmony. Not the sound of ending, but the sound of possibility. Somewhere out there, beyond the radiation storms and dying light of their sun, help was coming. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called for 1300 hours, Galactic Standard Time. By 1250, every seat in the massive chamber was filled, and the viewing galleries buzzed with reporters and diplomats from across known space. It had been decades since a minor species had dared to challenge a council decision, especially one involving resource allocation. Chancellor Vexmore's compound eyes glittered with annoyance as he surveyed the chamber from his elevated position, at the center of the curved assembly hall. The insectoid leader had ruled the Trade Alliance for 30 years, and was not accustomed to having his decisions questioned by newcomers. The council recognizes the representative from Earth, he announced, his translator rendering his chittering speech into flat, mechanical words. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood slowly, her simple blue diplomatic uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor worn by most other representatives. At 52, she was young by diplomatic standards, but her reputation for careful preparation and moral courage had earned respect even among species that considered humanity barely civilized. Honored Chancellor, esteemed representatives, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. 3 days ago, this council voted to deny assistance to the Cathara people, condemning 6 billion sentient beings to death by solar radiation. A murmur ran through the assembly. Such direct language was considered impolite in council proceedings. The human delegation formally challenges this decision under Article 7 of the Galactic Charter. Vasquez continued. We assert that the Kythera qualify for protection under the Galactic Preservation Mandate as a heritage species whose loss would constitute irreparable damage to galactic civilization. Chancellor Veximore's mandibles clicked irritably. The heritage species designation requires unanimous council approval. The criteria have not been met in over 4 centuries because no species has ever met the technological, cultural, and temporal requirements, Vasquez interrupted smoothly. Until now. She activated her holographic display, and a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy appeared above the chamber floor. Thousands of tiny lights connected by glowing lines showed the vast network of interstellar communication. Every hyperspace transmission in this galaxy relies on Kythera quantum crystal technology, she said. Every trade negotiation, every diplomatic communication, every emergency broadcast depends on crystalline matrices grown and maintained by Kythera scientists. Without them, interstellar civilization would collapse within a generation. Representative Thurok of the Militant Dominion, a species that resembled armored bears, snorted dismissively. Technology can be replicated. Other species can learn their methods. Can they? Vasquez asked. The Kythera have been growing quantum crystals for 800 years. Their knowledge is not written in databases or stored in computer files. It lives in the genetic memory of their people, passed down through biological inheritance that cannot be artificially reproduced. This was news to many in the chamber. The technological requirements for heritage status included not just advanced knowledge, but knowledge that was irreplaceable if lost. Furthermore, Vasquez continued, Kythera crystal technology represents the only known method of instantaneous communication across galactic distances. Losing this capability would fragment our civilization permanently. Chancellor Vexmore's chittering grew more agitated. Even if we accept your technical arguments, the economic reality remains unchanged. Relocating an entire species requires resources beyond any reasonable expenditure. Which brings me to humanity's formal proposal, Vasquez said, and the chamber fell silent. She activated a new display showing ship designs, logistics charts, and resource allocation tables. The Earth Colonial Authority and Space Force Command propose Operation Sunbridge, a complete evacuation and relocation of the Kythera population within 6 standard months. The silence stretched for several seconds before erupting into a chaos of voices. Representatives shouted questions and objections in dozens of languages while translators struggled to keep up. Impossible! Boomed Representative Korath of the Stone Kingdom, his rock-like features twisted with skepticism. No species has the ships to move 6 billion beings across interstellar space. Humanity has 14,000 registered vessels, capable of interstellar travel, Vasquez replied calmly. Colony ships, cargo haulers, passenger transports, and military vessels. We estimate we can evacuate the entire Kythera population in 3 major waves. Your largest ships hold maybe 50,000 beings at most, scoffed the representative. From the crystal hegemony, whose species had refused to share their own crystal-growing techniques centuries ago, the mathematics do not work. Our largest colony ships hold 200,000 beings in emergency configuration, Vasquez corrected. But you're right that standard evacuation procedures would be insufficient. That's why we're not using standard procedures. She brought up new schematics showing massive modifications to human vessels. We're converting cargo bays to emergency life support, linking ships together in formation to share power and resources, and establishing floating way station habitats to support the evacuation fleet during the journey. Representative Jektal of the Hive Collective, whose species valued efficiency above all else, leaned forward with interest. The resource expenditure for such an operation would bankrupt your entire species. The cost will be significant, Vasquez admitted. Current estimates suggest it will consume approximately 30% of humanity's total economic output for the next 2 years. But we consider this an acceptable price. Acceptable? Chancellor Vexmore's voice rose to an indignant screech. You would impoverish your own people for strangers? Ambassador Vasquez met his compound gaze steadily. We would invest in the future of galactic civilization. The Kythera have freely shared their technology for 8 centuries, asking nothing in return. They have enabled the prosperity and unity we all enjoy. Now in their time of need, humanity chooses to stand with them. And where will you relocate 6 billion refugees? Asked Representative Thurrock. Your own territories are already strained with colonial expansion. The Kythera will be granted full citizenship rights in human space, Vasquez replied. We're preparing to establish new Kythera in the Centauri Secundus system, where they can rebuild their civilization under a stable star. The chamber erupted again. The idea of one species voluntarily sharing their territory with refugees from another was unprecedented in galactic politics. Representative Morgeth of the Trade Syndicate, a species known for their calculating nature, raised a webbed hand for attention. What does humanity gain from this arrangement? Surely you expect some return on such an enormous investment. Ambassador Vasquez smiled, and for a moment her diplomatic composure slipped to reveal genuine warmth. We gain the knowledge that we prevented the extinction of 6 billion innocent beings. We gain the friendship of a people who have contributed immeasurably to galactic civilization. And yes, we hope to gain a closer partnership in crystal technology. Research, though the Kythera have offered this freely without any conditions. This is madness, Representative Vactor of the Expansion Front declared, his tentacles writhing with agitation. One minor species cannot undertake such an operation alone. You lack the experience, the infrastructure, the resources. We have something more valuable than resources, Vasquez interrupted. We have the will to act when action is needed. Chancellor Vexmore had heard enough. Even assuming your species possesses the theoretical capability for such an operation, which we doubt, the Council has already voted on this matter. The decision stands. Actually, it doesn't, Vasquez said quietly, and something in her tone made the entire chamber fall silent. Because as of 2 hours ago, the Kythera have been granted preliminary heritage status by the Terran Colonial Authority, acting under emergency powers granted by our own colonial charter. The implications hit the chamber like a shockwave. If humanity was acting unilaterally to protect a heritage species, other council members would be legally prohibited from interfering under interstellar law. This is outrageous. Chancellor Vexmore's chittering reached a furious crescendo. Your species cannot unilaterally declare another species protected. We can and we have, Vasquez replied. The paperwork has already been filed with the Galactic Court. Until the court rules otherwise, the Kythera are under human protection. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of representatives who had dismissed humanity as irrelevant just moments before. To our friends in this council who voted to condemn an innocent species to death, I say this: watch and learn. Humanity keeps its promises. As Ambassador Vasquez gathered her materials and prepared to leave, the chamber remained in stunned silence. Outside, human ships were already beginning to move toward Kythera space, carrying supplies and evacuation, equipment for what many considered an impossible mission. But on Earth and its colonies, millions of humans were volunteering to help, converting civilian vessels and organizing supply drives with a determination that the galaxy had never seen before. The impossible was about to be attempted. Captain Maria Santos stood on the bridge of the Endeavor, staring at the tactical display that showed what remained of the Kythera system. 3 of the 7 crystal moons were now completely dark, their populations evacuated to the remaining 4 worlds before the solar radiation made travel between them impossible. The Kythera sun pulsed with an angry red light, sending waves of deadly energy across the system every few hours. Captain, we're receiving the latest fleet status report from Admiral Chen, her communications officer announced. Maria nodded grimly. Put it through to my console. The report that appeared on her screen would have discouraged anyone who didn't understand human determination. Of the 300 ships that had left human space 2 weeks ago, only 260 had made it to the Kythera system. 40 vessels had suffered critical failures during the journey, their crews evacuated to other ships before the damaged vessels were abandoned in deep space. But that wasn't the worst news. Engineering teams report that Kythera crystal technology is completely incompatible with our power systems, Chief Engineer Rodriguez announced from his station. Every time we try to connect their crystal matrices to our ships, we get massive feedback that nearly destroys both systems. Maria closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. This was the problem they had hoped wouldn't exist. but had feared they would find. The Kythera didn't just live on crystal worlds, they lived in harmony with crystal technology. Their entire civilization was built around quantum crystals that grew and evolved over centuries. You couldn't just unplug them and carry them to human ships. What about the modified cargo containers, she asked. They're working for small family groups, Rodriguez replied, but each container can only support maybe 50 Kythera at most. At that rate, it would take us 50 years to evacuate everyone. And we don't have 50 days before the solar storms make approach impossible. The bridge fell silent except for the hum of the ship's systems and the distant rumble of solar radiation hitting their shields. Maria stared at the tactical display, watching the small dots that represented human ships scattered throughout the Kythera system. Each dot was a crew of volunteers who had risked everything to come here, and she was running out of ways to make their sacrifice worthwhile. "Captain," her communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the surface of Kythera Prime. It's from HFY, on screen." The Kythera scientist appeared as a hologram, his crystalline skin flickering between deep blue worry and faded gray despair. Behind him, Maria could see the crystal towers of his laboratory, their light noticeably dimmer than when she had first visited the system. "Captain Santos, I must thank you and your people for your heroic efforts," HFY began, his translated voice carrying obvious exhaustion. "But I fear we must face reality. Our crystal matrices cannot be separated from our world systems without causing complete breakdown. We have managed to evacuate perhaps 50,000 of our people to your ships, but the rest—" He didn't need to finish. Maria had seen the projections. The next major solar storm was predicted to hit in 36 hours, and it would be powerful, enough to sterilize any remaining life on the crystal moons. "HFY, we're not giving up," Maria said firmly. "My engineers are still working on solutions." "With respect, Captain, some problems have no solutions. We have accepted our fate. Those of our people who survive aboard your vessels will carry our memory to the stars. It is more than we dared hope for when this began." Before Maria could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the bridge. "Captain, we're detecting massive energy spikes from the system's edge," her sensor operator reported urgently. "Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace." Maria's heart sank. The only logical explanation was that rival species had arrived to claim the Kythera crystal technology after the extinction was complete. But when the sensor readings clarified, she stared at her screen in disbelief. "Those are human ships," she whispered. "Not just human ships," her communications officer added with growing excitement. "Captain, there are over 2,000 vessels out there. Colony ships, cargo haulers, passenger liners, even converted mining barges. They're all flying human registration codes." Admiral Chen's voice crackled over the communication system from his flagship. "All vessels. This is Admiral Chen aboard the Spirit of Terra. The second evacuation wave has arrived. Civilian captains are ordered to maintain formation and await assignment to evacuation zones." Maria felt a surge of pride and hope unlike anything she had experienced before. Back on Earth, word of the Kythera evacuation had spread through every human colony and settlement. Civilian ship captains had volunteered in thousands, converting their vessels for refugee transport and flying across the galaxy to help with the rescue operation. But even with 2,000 more ships, the fundamental problem remained unchanged. The Kythera crystal matrices still couldn't be safely transported using human technology. It was Chief Rodriguez who came up with the solution that changed everything. "Captain, what if we're thinking about this backward?" he asked during the emergency strategy meeting held 6 hours later. Representatives from 50 human ships crowded into the Endeavor's conference room, their faces grim but determined. "Explain," Admiral Chen ordered. "We've been trying to figure out how to move the Kythera crystals to our ships," Rodriguez continued. "But what if we move our ships to the crystals instead?" Captain Walsh of the colony ship New Horizon leaned forward with interest. "You're talking about landing our vessels on the surface?" "Better than that," Rodriguez replied, activating a holographic display. "We link our ships together in formation around each crystal moon. Use magnetic clamps, tractor beams, anything we have to create a connected network of vessels. Then we don't evacuate the Kythera population. We evacuate the entire infrastructure." The room fell silent as everyone studied the display. What Rodriguez was proposing was unprecedented. Instead of loading refugees onto ships, they would essentially build floating cities around the crystal moons, then fly those cities to safety. The engineering challenges would be enormous, Admiral Chen said slowly. We'd need perfect coordination between hundreds of vessels, and any failure in the connection system could destroy multiple ships. But it could work, Captain Martinez of the cargo hauler Freedom's Dream added with growing excitement. My ship has industrial magnetic clamps rated for moving asteroid mining stations. If we could link enough vessels together, we'd need volunteers, Admiral Chen warned. Ships on the inside of the formation would be at maximum risk if something goes wrong. Every captain in the room raised their hand. Over the next 18 hours, humanity attempted something that had never been tried before in the history of space travel. Working with desperate speed as solar radiation levels continued to rise, human ships formed complex geometric patterns around the 4 remaining Kythera moons. The largest formation surrounded Kythera Prime, where nearly 3 billion people lived in the vast crystal cities. Over 800 human vessels linked together using magnetic clamps, tractor beams, and even physical cables to create a protective shell around the moon. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. From a distance, it looked like each moon had grown a metallic flower, with human ships forming petals around the glowing crystal cores. But beauty wasn't the goal. Survival was. All ships report ready for acceleration, Admiral Chen announced as the final connections were tested and confirmed. Crystal moon formations will maintain internal gravity using artificial gravity generators. Estimated journey time to the Centauri Secundus system is 4 months at maximum safe speed. Maria stood on her bridge, watching the tactical display show the incredible sight of 4 moons surrounded by human ships beginning to move through space. It should have been impossible. The coordination required was beyond what most species could achieve, but humanity had done it anyway. Captain, HFY's voice came over the communication system, and Maria could hear the wonder in his translated words. Our crystal matrices are stable. The connections are holding. We are flying. Through her view screen, Maria could see the crystal towers of Kythera Prime glowing brightly as they began their journey to a new star. The towers were no longer singing their death song, they were singing of hope. 3 weeks into the journey to Centauri Secundus, disaster struck the formation surrounding Kythera Prime. Commander Elena Rodriguez was sleeping in her quarters aboard the cargo hauler Persistence when the collision alarms jerked her awake. The ship shuddered violently, throwing her from her bunk as emergency lighting bathed everything in red. All hands to emergency stations, came the announcement over the ship's communication system. Hull breach in Section C, magnetic clamp failure, on the starboard connector array. Elena pulled on her pressure suit and ran toward the bridge, her mind racing through the implications. The Persistence was one of the key connector ships in the formation around Kythera Prime, using its heavy-duty industrial magnetic clamps to link 12 other vessels together. If those clamps failed, a significant portion of the protective shell around the moon would collapse. Report, she shouted as she reached the bridge. Micrometeorite strike took out our primary power coupling, her engineering officer reported. The magnetic field fluctuation caused a cascade failure in the connector array. We're losing our grip on the Jakarta Dawn and the New Prospect. Through the forward view screen, Elena could see the 2 ships slowly drifting away from the formation as their connection to the network failed. But worse than that, she could see the crystal city on the surface of Kythera Prime directly below the gap they were creating. Without the protective shell of human ships, that section of the moon's surface would be exposed to the radiation and debris of interstellar space during their 4-month journey. The crystal matrices that powered an entire district of the city would be destroyed, and the 100,000 Kythera living there would die. Can we restore the magnetic clamps? Elena asked. Not without shutting down life support to half the ship, her engineering officer replied grimly. The power couplings are completely fused. We'd need a full shipyard to repair the damage. Elena stared at the slowly widening gap in the formation. In 6 hours, the drift would become irreversible, and they would lose those 2 ships permanently. Standard procedure would be to evacuate the endangered section of Kythera Prime and accept the loss of that district. But Elena Rodriguez wasn't interested in standard procedure. Get me Captain Santos on the Endeavor, she ordered. Priority channel. Maria Santos's face appeared on the communication screen moments later, her expression grim as she studied the damage reports. Elena, we're looking at your situation. Engineering. Teams are calculating whether we can reroute ships from other sections of the formation to fill the gap. That would take hours we don't have, Elena replied. But I have another idea. What if we don't fix the magnetic clamps at all? I'm listening. The Jakarta Dawn and New Prospect are both equipped with manual docking clamps, right? The kind used for emergency ship-to-ship connections during rescue operations. Maria nodded slowly. Yes, but Elena, you're not seriously suggesting physical connections, Elena continued with growing excitement. Forget the magnetic clamps and the fancy electronics. We use old-fashioned docking clamps, emergency airlocks, and physical cables. Link the ships together the way our grandparents did it before we had all this automated equipment. That would require EVA teams to work in open space while we're traveling at maximum velocity, Maria pointed out. One mistake, and we lose people to the void. Then we don't make mistakes, Elena replied simply. What happened over the next 12 hours became legendary in the annals of human space operations. Elena Rodriguez coordinated with the captains of the Jakarta Dawn and New Prospect to attempt something that had never been tried before, rebuilding a damaged formation using manual connections while traveling through interstellar space. EVA teams from all three ships suited up and ventured into the void between the vessels, carrying physical cables and emergency docking clamps. Working in the darkness between the stars with only their suit lights to guide them, they began the painstaking process of literally tying the ships together. Jakarta Dawn, this is Rodriguez. Our team has the primary support cable in position. Can you confirm tension readings? Confirmed, Elena. Cable is holding steady, moving to connect the secondary support line. The work was brutally difficult. In the zero-gravity environment between the ships, every action had an equal and opposite reaction. Connecting a cable meant pushing yourself away from your target, requiring constant correction from suit thrusters. The cables themselves were massive. Designed to handle the stresses of docking operations, and maneuvering them in spacesuits was exhausting work. But human stubbornness and ingenuity prevailed. This is crazy, muttered Petty Officer Kim as she guided a support cable toward its connection point on the New Prospect. We're basically hot-wiring a moon. Crazy gets the job done, replied Specialist Martinez, using his suit's magnetic anchors to hold position while he operated the manual clamp controls. Besides, you think the Cathara down there care about our engineering elegance? As word of the manual repair operation spread throughout the fleet, other ships began volunteering their EVA teams to help. Soon, dozens of suited figures were working in the space between the vessels, creating a web of cables, support struts, and emergency connections that looked nothing like the elegant magnetic formations they had started with. Captain Santos watched from the Endeavor's bridge as status reports poured in from across the formation. Similar problems were occurring at other connection points as the stresses of interstellar travel took their toll on equipment that had never been designed for this kind of operation. Admiral Chen to all vessels, came the announcement over the fleet communication system. We're seeing formation stress across multiple connection points. All ships are authorized to implement emergency manual connections as needed. What followed was the largest coordinated EVA operation in human history. Thousands of spacesuited volunteers worked around the clock to reinforce the formations using manual connections, turning the elegant geometric patterns around each Kythera moon into improvised but functional networks held together by human determination and engineering creativity. The formations began to look less like flowers and more like massive spiderwebs, with ships connected by visible cables and support structures. It wasn't beautiful, but it worked. You know, HFY commented to Captain Santos during one of their regular communication sessions, your species has a remarkable gift for finding solutions that should be impossible. Maria smiled as she looked at the tactical display showing the web of connections surrounding Kythera Prime. We call it the human way, HFY. When elegant solutions don't work, we use whatever works. Even when it requires your people to risk their lives in the void between worlds? Especially then, Maria replied. Nobody gets left behind. Not the Kythera in their crystal cities, and not the humans keeping those cities safe. The manual repair, Operations continued for weeks as the makeshift convoy crawled toward Centauri Secundus. Every day brought new challenges as equipment failed and connections needed reinforcement. But every day also brought new examples of human ingenuity and determination. When the formation around Kythera Secondary lost its main communication array, volunteers from the passenger liner Starlight rigged a replacement using parts from their entertainment system. When the cargo hauler Mountain's Pride ran low on life support, 3 other vessels shared their oxygen reserves while repairs were made. Most importantly, when a section of the formation around the smallest crystal moon began to collapse due to structural fatigue, Captain Walsh of the New Horizon made a decision that exemplified everything humanity represented. "This is Captain Walsh to all ships," she announced. "The New Horizon is moving to plug the gap in Formation 4. We're a big ship and we can use our mass to stabilize the connection points." "Sarah, that puts you right in the center of the formation," Admiral Chen replied over the communication system. "If anything goes wrong with the structural connections, you'll take the worst of it." "Then we better make sure nothing goes wrong," Walsh replied calmly. "My crew knew what we were signing up for when we volunteered. The Kythera are depending on us." As the massive colony ship maneuvered into the most dangerous position in the formation, her crew worked with mechanical precision to establish connections with the surrounding vessels. Within hours, the threatened section was stabilized and another 100,000 Kythera civilians were safe. But the cost was becoming apparent. The human ships were being pushed beyond their design limits, and casualties were mounting. Equipment failures, EVA accidents, and the constant stress of operating in formations no ship had been designed for were taking their toll. Yet not a single human captain requested to withdraw from the operation. "Why do they do this?" Elder Morthak asked HFY as they watched human EVA teams working to reinforce connections outside their laboratory window. "These beings risk everything for strangers they barely know." HFY's skin shifted to warm gold as he considered the question. "I think, Elder, that they do it because they cannot imagine doing anything else. For humans, the question is not whether someone deserves to be saved. The question is whether they have the power to save them." Outside, another human in a pressure suit waved at the window as he floated past, carrying a replacement cable to repair a damaged connection point. HFY waved back, marveling at the casual bravery of 6 months after the first human ship had arrived in Kythera space. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood before the Galactic Council once again. But this time the chamber was different. Instead of the skeptical silence that had greeted humanity's initial proposal, the assembly buzzed with respectful conversation as representatives discussed what many were calling the greatest rescue operation in galactic history. The holographic display above the chamber floor showed New Kythera, the spectacular crystal habitat that now orbited the stable star of Centauri Secundus. 4 crystal moons hung in perfect formation around the brilliant star, their cities glowing with renewed life as billions of Kythera continued their ancient civilization under friendly skies. But the display showed more than just the crystal cities. Scattered throughout the system were hundreds of human ships, some still connected to the Kythera habitats by the improvised cables and support structures that had saved them during their journey. Others had taken up permanent positions as supply ships, communication relays, and defense platforms. The Human Kythera Alliance has exceeded all projections for successful species integration, Vasquez announced to the Assembly. Not only have we successfully relocated the entire Kythera population, but the collaboration between our species has produced technological advances that benefit the entire galaxy. She activated a new display showing the quantum crystal communication networks that now connected every human world to the galactic communication system. The improvement in signal clarity and transmission speed was remarkable. Kythera Crystal technology has revolutionized human space travel and communication, she continued. In return, human engineering techniques have allowed the Kythera to grow crystal matrices faster and more efficiently than ever before. Our 2 species have become partners in the truest sense. Representative Thurrock of the Militant Dominion leaned forward with obvious interest. The report suggests that human ships can now achieve communication ranges previously thought impossible. What are the implications for galactic defense? Any species that wishes to upgrade their communication systems is welcome to apply for crystal matrix installations, Vasquez replied diplomatically. The Kythera have always shared their technology freely, and that policy continues under the alliance. Chancellor Vexmore, who had opposed the rescue operation from the beginning, chittered quietly before speaking. The Council acknowledges the success of Operation Sunbridge. However, we must address the precedent this has established. Other endangered species have already begun requesting similar assistance. This was the moment Vasquez had been waiting for. Over the past 6 months, as word of humanity's actions had spread throughout the galaxy, the rescue had inspired something unexpected: hope among species that had been written off as politically or economically insignificant. Honored Chancellor, that brings me to humanity's formal proposal for the establishment of the Galactic Preservation Initiative, she announced, and activated her final holographic display. The display showed a star map of the galaxy with dozens of highlighted systems, each representing a species or civilization in danger of extinction due to natural disasters, resource depletion, or political abandonment. The Human Colonial Authority proposes the creation of a permanent rescue and relocation service, jointly operated by volunteer species and funded through a combination of Council resources and private contributions. We call it the We Stand. With U Protocol, the chamber erupted in surprised conversation. The idea of a permanent rescue service was unprecedented in galactic politics, where species typically focused on their own survival and prosperity. Representative Jektal of the Hive Collective was the first to speak. The resource requirements for such an operation would be enormous. What species would volunteer for such a burden? Humanity volunteers to serve as the primary coordinator and contributor, Vasquez replied, but we've already received formal commitments from 12 other species to provide ships, equipment, and personnel for rescue operations. She didn't mention that most of those 12 species were minor civilizations that had been inspired by humanity's example. What mattered was that the idea was spreading. Moreover, she continued, the Cathera have agreed to provide crystal communication technology to any rescue operation at no cost, ensuring that evacuation fleets can coordinate effectively across any distance. Representative Morgoth of the Trade Syndicate raised a webbed hand. What assurance does the Council have that rescued species will not become a burden on galactic resources? The same assurance you have for any Council member species, Vasquez replied firmly. Every species that has ever joined the galactic community has contributed something unique and valuable. The Cathera are proof of that principle. As if summoned by her words, a new voice joined the chamber's communication system. Zephai's crystalline features appeared as a hologram beside the main display, his skin glowing with the warm gold of deep gratitude. Honored representatives, he began, his translated voice carrying clearly through the chamber. 6 months ago, the Cathera people faced extinction. 47 species voted to abandon us to our fate. Only one species chose to act. The chamber fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. The Cathera now controlled the most advanced communication technology in the galaxy, and their loyalty to humanity was absolute. Today, the Cathera formally endorse humanity's proposal for the Galactic Preservation Initiative, Zephai continued. Furthermore, we announce that all future Cathera crystal technology will be prioritized for species that participate in rescue operations. The galaxy must choose between abandoning the innocent and standing together against the darkness, the law. Silence stretched for several seconds before Representative Korath of the Stone Kingdom spoke in his rumbling voice. The Stone Kingdom will contribute mining vessels and construction equipment to rescue operations. The Crystal Hegemony offers manufacturing facilities for emergency life support equipment, added another representative somewhat grudgingly. The Hive Collective can provide logistical coordination services, Jektal announced, his insectoid features showing calculation. Our organizational abilities may prove valuable. One by one, species that had voted against helping the Cathera began volunteering resources for the rescue initiative. Some were motivated by genuine compassion, awakened by humanity's example. Others were driven by practical considerations. Access to Cathera crystal technology was too valuable to risk. But the motivations didn't matter. What mattered was that the galaxy was changing. Chancellor Vexmore found himself facing a political reality he had never expected. Very well. The Council will vote on the establishment of the Galactic Preservation Initiative. All in favor? The vote was 39 in favor, with only 8 abstentions and no opposing votes. The Chancellor's own vote was among the supporting majority. 3 hours later, Admiral Chen stood in the observation deck of the Spirit of Terra, looking out at New Kythera through the reinforced viewport. The crystal cities glowed with their eternal light, but now that light was joined by the warm yellow illumination of human habitats scattered throughout the system. Captain Santos joined him at the viewport, her uniform showing the new insignia of the Galactic Preservation Initiative. "Hard to believe it all started with one distress call," she said. "Not just any distress call," Chen replied. "One that reached the right people at the right time." Through the viewport, they could see human children and young Kythera playing together in the crystal gardens that had been grown around the human habitats. The sight had become common throughout the new Kythera system, 2 species learning to live and grow together, their differences becoming strengths rather than barriers. "Admiral," Santos said quietly, "we're receiving a priority transmission from the edge of the system. Long-range sensors are detecting a refugee convoy from the outer spiral. Their star is going supernova, and they're requesting assistance." Chen smiled and straightened his uniform. "How many ships?" 3 vessels, approximately 50,000 refugees from a species we've never encountered before. They're calling themselves the Wanderers." "Signal the fleet," Chen ordered. "All available vessels are to prepare for Operation Starbridge." "And Santos?" "Yes, sir." "Send a message to the refugee convoy. Tell them that humanity has received their distress call, and help is on the way. Tell them." He paused, looking out at the crystal cities where 2 species had found a new home together. "Tell them we stand with you." As alarms sounded throughout, the human fleet and ships began preparing for another impossible rescue mission. The crystal towers of New Kythera sang in harmony with the humming engines of human vessels. It was a song of hope, of species standing together against the darkness of an uncaring universe. It was the sound of a galaxy that had learned to care. Years later, historians would mark the Kythera rescue as the turning point, when galactic civilization chose compassion over convenience, when the strong chose to protect the weak rather than exploit them. The We Stand With You protocol would go on to save dozens of species from extinction, creating a network of mutual